2. Hayden. Hayden McKenna dropped the speed of his dually truck to a crawl at 20 miles an hour when he pulled within the city limits of Oyster Bay, his hometown and a place he never thought he'd move back to. The once-a-year visits had been plenty to appease his parents, especially since they preferred to travel now that they were both retired and had nothing holding them down. He drove across the bridge slowly, angling his head in every direction to make sure the camper he towed behind his truck had clearance. Normally, once he was across, he'd turn right and head through the heart of town, but with the size of his truck and the extra cargo behind him, he was liable to get stuck. With no choice but to take the long way around, Hayden readjusted in his seat once he'd cleared the bridge and mentally calculated another 15 minutes to the piece of land he'd bought a few months back. There, he'd unhitch and then head to his parents' place, even though it was getting late. Connor, Hayden's 9-year-old son, stirred in the passenger seat. Hayden watched his son out of the corner of his eye, waiting to see if he'd wake. Connor yawned, then rubbed his eyes, and then ran his hand through his short, dishwater blonde hair. Hayden had taken him to get it cut before they made the cross-country trip, in time to start at his new school. It had been the first time he'd done so since Connor was a baby, when his wife, Sophia, had made his first haircut a huge celebration.
"Where are we?"
he asked groggily. "Almost there," Hayden said in the darkened cab of the truck.
"To Grandma's?"
"Shortly. We have to drop the camper off first." Connor looked behind them. Hayden did the same through the rear view. Everything they owned was in the back of the truck. The important things were in the extended cab. The camper held their clothes and whatever household supplies Hayden had kept or could fit in there. He'd live in the camper on the piece of land and break ground on their new home, while Connor would live with his grandparents. As much as Hayden hated to admit it, he needed help with his son. The single-parent life was hard, and the past year had proved he couldn't do it alone. Connor sighed and straightened.
"I miss Mom."
"Me too," Hayden said automatically. It had been his response every time Connor said it. The truth was, as much as he missed his wife, he was angry with her. Her death could have been prevented if she had called him for a ride home. Hayden turned slowly and drove a half-mile until the empty lot came into view. He turned and pressed the gas until his front tires slowly climbed the curb and repeated the action until the camper was on the land. In the dusk of twilight, Hayden unhitched and secured his temporary home and then drove over to his parents' house. As soon as he pulled up, Connor was out of the truck and running toward his grandmother, who stood at the top of her porch with outstretched arms. Hayden parked and took his sweet time getting out of the truck, pausing to gather their overnight bags.
"Hayden,"
his mother said as he approached the porch. "Hey, Mom." Darcy McKenna hugged her son and let him go only when Hayden's father, Lee, interrupted. "Hey, Dad." Lee and Darcy McKenna were well-known and well-liked pillars of the community. Not a soul in town didn't know and love the McKenna family. Lee had been the town doctor, and Darcy his nurse. Both were born and raised in Oyster Bay. Darcy was petite, with blonde hair and bright blue eyes, while Lee was a bit taller than the average person, with light brown hair and hazel eyes. Since retirement, he liked his beer, but his beer didn't like him much, and went right to his waistline. His parents hadn't been able to make Sophia's funeral. They were on a cruise in Europe, and by the time they received Hayden's message, they hadn't had enough time to get to Wyoming for the service.